from here at Union Station. There are a number of you who did. Millions and millions of veterans came through Union Station, and they left their mark on the building. 80 trains each day came through Denver's Union Station back during the time of World War II. There's little doubt that General Rose also traveled from here. Before you leave today, I want to make sure everyone goes inside and looks at the grooves or the swales that were carved by all the boots of the veterans who came and sat in Union Station. The benches used to go this direction through the station, and as you look from the vantage point of the terminal bar and you look through the room, you'll see the swales where everyone's boots, as they sat there and moved their feet, ground swales into the floor. So make sure you take a look at that. It's a constant reminder for all of us here about all the people that went off to war in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and they left their mark. And you know, a number of them never came back. So that's a wonderful memory we have of the veterans and its connection to Union Station. So enjoy your day here. And once again, we're so honored by your presence, Corporal Smoyer. You liked the tank, did you? You felt at home. All right. Well, in a minute, we're going to have you come tell us more about some stories about your time in World War II. So without further delay, it's my privilege to introduce Corporal Clarence Smoyer and Adam Makos, the author of the book, both authors of the book, for your remarks.
Thank you so much, Jim. How does that sound? What a welcome. Clarence, you have some fans here in the Mile High City, I'd say.
Yay! Right. Yay!
Now, before I tell you about this wonderful hero, I'd like to just acknowledge the people who made it possible for us to be here today. I always thought of Union Station as a great place to get a beer, or to pick up a friend coming in on a train, or to get a tuna crudo. But I realize now this is hallowed ground. And the fellow who enlightened me to this and who made today possible, we got to give him a lot of credit, Mr. John Mark Larder, right here in the blue glasses. John works for Union Station. And he told me a story when we first came here. We had this crazy idea, we want to bring a tank, we want to park Jeeps on your plaza. And he told me this story. He said, you know, one time I came out of my office and I saw a woman at the end of the hall, and she was crying. And he went up to console her and to comfort her. And he found out she came to Union Station to retrace a memory. And that memory was the last time she saw her husband was when she said goodbye to him in this station. And he went away to World War II, and he never came back. And when I heard that, I realized this is truly hallowed ground. So when we came here and we said, can we do this? John Mark could have killed all this with one word. He could have said no, but he said yes. So a lot of credit to him and the folks at Union Station. Now, I know the Jeeps are fun, I know the half-track is cool, but we almost didn't have a tank if it wasn't for the one man in the state of Colorado who has an operable tank. And we called him up north of here. His name's Russ Morgan, and we said, Russ, can you help us? We want to bring a World War II hero to Union Station, and we want him to arrive in style. And Russ Morgan, there was nothing in it for him. Why would he bring his tank all the way down here? Why would he pay all that money to truck it? He wanted to do this for Clarence. So I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Russ Morgan right here. Thank you, Russ. And we owe thanks to Curtis Fox, who brought the half-track, and all the guys who brought the Jeeps, and to Sean Moran of RTD, who actually let us park on this beautiful plaza. We owe thanks to the media for spreading the word, and we owe it to you, because a lot of people say thank you for your service to veterans, but you showed up today. You didn't just say thanks. You showed how much you care about Clarence with your actions. So my hat is off to you.
And our fathers have fought in World War II.
Amen.
Amen. Now I'd like to thank somebody who traveled 1,700 miles to be here today. He's 95 years old. He's been described as an artist with a tank gun. The man who killed the monster, the Panther tank at Cologne. He's been called the hero of Cologne. And no, I'm not describing Sergeant Rock. I'm describing Corporal Clarence Smoyer. Now, a friend yesterday said, you know, this won't be the first time Clarence rolled up to a train station on a tank. It gave me time to think, and he was right, because at the end of the war, Clarence in his tank led an attack on the Paderborn train station, and he tore the place apart. Guns blazing. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of John and everyone else for, arriving a little more peaceful entrance today, Mr. Smoyer. Clarence is my hero. 6 years I've had the chance to get to know him. We've traveled to Germany twice and back. But he's come a long way to recognize his hero. His hero was that man from Denver that Jim told you about, General Maurice Rose, who was killed in battle 74 years ago today. You may have heard of Rose Medical Center. It's named after him. But he was a commander of the 3rd Armored Division, Clarence's unit. He was the man who gave the unit its name, the Spearhead Division. They were a unit known for piercing the enemy lines and making deep drives behind enemy lines, sowing chaos. Deeper drives than even General Patton ever made. General Rose would have gone on to be one of our greatest heroes if his life wasn't cut short at age 45. How do you describe General Rose? And Clarence will tell you when he gets the mic. But General Rose was always out in front. He was out in front that day in August 1944 at Ain, France, when his engineers came upon a bridge and they thought it might be mined. They thought it couldn't hold the tanks, and it was under enemy fire. Rose said, well, has anybody checked the bridge? And they hadn't, so he dashed across himself, under machine gun fire, under mortar fire, out in front, quite literally, and he came back and he said, send the tanks across. General Rose was also out in front that day, March 1945, at Rhea, Germany. He was coming back from the front line to his command post when he saw 15 Germans dart across the road and disappear into a cemetery. Before the Jeep could even stop, Rose was out with a Tommy gun in his hand, darting into the cemetery, and about 10 minutes later they saw him herding out 12 Germans with his pistol, prisoners that he had taken himself, and one private said it was a sight to behold. General Rose was out in front on March 30th, 1945, 74 years ago today, at about this time, because in Germany it's evening now. It's about 6 o'clock, and back then it was almost 7 o'clock when he was driving through the fields out in front in the lead task force. Clarence was parked in a forest about a mile away. They were bivouacked for the night, but Rose wanted to go forward. And that night he drove into an ambush. 15 German tanks were laying in wait. And they began shooting apart his column. It was called the Wellborn Massacre. And in the dark, they ambushed that column, destroying 9 Sherman tanks, 1 Stuart tank, 21 of those half-tracks, 2 Jeeps. But do you want to know how General Rose died that night? He was in a ditch with his Tommy gun as the bullets were flying. And then he said, somebody's got to get control of this situation. Somebody's got to set up a command post. And he got in his Jeep, and he got his entourage, and they drove forward. They drove forward along the burning column, forward as German tanks were closing in on the left and right. He was out in front when a German tank ran his Jeep across the road into a tree in the dark. He was out in front when the German demanded his surrender. And when Rose dropped his hands to take his pistol off, as the German had asked, the German tank commander panicked, and he shot him. And General Rose died there out in front of his troops. The next morning, my friend Clarence led the rescue party, the first relief column on the scene, but it was too late. The obituary for General Rose speaks to the man he was, the man out in front. One of his soldiers said, "It was a miracle he didn't get it before, but by God, what a man to lose." It was a miracle he didn't get it before. That's because his soldiers knew what Clarence knew, and that is, this was a man who led from the front. Now, Clarence and I wish to present a painting, and we're going to do that in a little bit, so that travelers who come through Union Station will always remember this man. But first, I'd like Clarence himself to tell a few of his war stories. This is to me like getting to hear Babe Ruth tell how he hit a home run, or Neil Armstrong to talk about stepping on the moon. This is the man who led the U.S. Army through the city of Cologne, Germany, who dueled 2 enemy tanks there, who knocked out the Panther tank, caught on film by an Army cameraman, who destroyed 5 tanks during World War II. If you saw the movie Fury, Brad Pitt did a good job, but he was playing a fictional role. Our friend here is the real deal. So now I invite him to come up and we'll share the mic, and I'm going to ask Clarence to tell a few stories. So I'll ask the question and I'll pass you the mic. All right. Now, Clarence, when he first met General Rose, we're going to tell that day. After the Battle of the Bulge, we lost so many of our Sherman tanks. We actually had to borrow them from the British to continue the attack into Germany. The Sherman tank was outmatched, outgunned by the German Panthers and the Tigers. We needed to turn the tables. So they rushed over 20 experimental tanks, the Pershing, the American super tank, and they gave them to the best crews in the European theater, only 20, to be tested in battle. And this gentleman was given one of those tanks. Now it had a new gun, a 90mm gun, bigger than anything we had mounted on one of our tanks. And he had to test fire it for the first time. And adding to the pressure, the whole division was there on a hill outside of Stolberg, Germany. And you were to shoot at these houses in the flooded Rhineland. And someone else came that day, and it was General Rose. And as usual, General Rose was out in front. Clarence's tank was ready to take its first shot. He's at the gun. He's nervous. And General Rose positioned himself as far in front as he could go, right alongside of the Pershing. Now, no one had ever seen this fire before, and General Rose was about to find out how it worked.
Hold it close.
Test fire.
Test fire, yeah. We were supposed to test fire the gun, and they gave us a range of like, I think, 1,200 yards.
Closer, Clarence, closer.
And we fired at a chimney on top of the building and knocked the chimney off. And when we fired the gun, the concussion went back along the sides and knocked General Rose and all the people, the reporters, everybody on their butts. So anyway, then we had another building about 1,500 yards away. And it was a large chimney on the right side, and the left side, just the top of the chimney was sticking up from like an addition to the home. And first they said, now we're going to attempt to get that chimney on the right side of that house. And I fired, and it went away. But then they said, now for our last shot, this is going to be a little harder because just a little bit of the chimney sticking up over the roof there. We're going to attempt to get that chimney off of that house. And when I fired the gun, there's a big cloud of red bricks flew up in the air, and everybody was cheering. It was wonderful. We did our duty on that job. Okay.
Now, Clarence, when you invaded the city of Cologne, that's what you're known for. You're called the hero of Cologne. There's a famous quote that I love hearing when you recite it. Your tank was going to lead the way into the city with this new Pershing. It had never been really used in battle. And your commanding officer comes on the radio. What does he tell you as you're about to kick off the battle?
He said, gentlemen, I give you Cologne. Let's knock the hell out of it. And we did. We did.
Now, Clarence led the way through the city, and on the last day of the battle, he engaged a German Panther tank that had just knocked out 2 American tanks, killing 3 Americans in the last hour of the battle. And this was the moment he was most famous for, because an Army cameraman from Colorado Springs, Jim Bates, put himself up in a building on the 3rd floor, much like this. And the Panther tank was parked in front of the cathedral at Cologne. And Clarence's crew went forward to deal with this tank. I'm going to let him tell you about their plan to engage the Panther and how he actually succeeded.
We had instructions to just expose part of the tank, so we moved forward and supposed to stop and fire and then back away because our tanks, the Shermans had a history of not being able to knock the German tanks out. So as we're moving forward, the driver saw the German tank gun coming around to meet us. He got excited and he roared right out into the middle of the intersection. And by the time we got past the building, I looked and saw the gun almost looking down on the barrel. And I pulled the trigger and I hit him once, right about the center of the side of the tank. And I fired another one back further because I wanted to try and make the tank catch fire and burn so there's nobody sitting in there that could get a free shot at us. But the second shot, I hit him again, but it still didn't catch the fire. So I fired the third one, and then all of a sudden the flames started to go up and burned and blew up. So we finished the job.
Now, an Army cameraman, Jim Bates, as I mentioned, came down after he had destroyed the tank. And if you look on the cover of Spearhead, you're going to see a frame taken from that film. And he filmed Clarence and his crew minutes after they had destroyed this tank. And you can see the men look like they've seen a ghost. They've got the 1,000-yard stare because they had literally been staring death in the face. Now, that film that he took went into the newsreels, and some people saw it back home. It went around the world. It made you the famous gunner of World War II. Tell me about who saw that back home.
My sister-in-law, well, to begin with, my brother was in the Navy, and his wife went to the theater to see a film, and the news usually was played first, and while we were sitting there, all of a sudden this tank pulled up, and I popped out of the top of it. And she said, they said, "Oh my God, that's Hun." At home, my nickname was Hun, and I couldn't use that nickname in the Army. Anyway, they watched the film, and after the show, they went to the manager and asked him to show it again so my mother and Dad could see it too. And they obliged, and worked out well.
And so when Clarence's parents saw him in that film, they knew he was alive. If you think about that, they hadn't heard mail from him in a while, and they suddenly see him on the screen, and they know he's still breathing. Now, Clarence was sometimes a bit of a rebel. I know he's a nice guy today, but back then he was kind of a bad boy at times. One of the last little stories, we just have 2 little stories left. Tell about how your colonel caught you without your helmet, because that day, in the newsreel footage, you can see Clarence. He's the guy with the blonde curly hair. Everybody else is obeying regulations, wearing their steel pot helmets. Tell me about that.
Well, as we moved ahead there, it was stop and go. Every time we run into resistance, they stop and clear it up. The infantry worked alongside of us, go through the homes, and make sure nobody was going to drop a Molotov cocktail on us or something like that. But anyway, I lost my Colonel Doan. A Jeep pulled up beside us, and I popped. Well, first of all, I threw my helmet, like a football helmet with the earphones. I threw that on the top of the gun and stuck my head up and out of the tank, and here the Colonel Doan was there, and he said, "Soldier, get your helmet on." So I popped down into the tank again. I stayed down there. I didn't want to fight with him anymore. And the last little story we'd like to tell before we're going to present this painting.
Clarence, after you'd knocked out that Panther tank, later on, some of the men in the Stewart tanks, like the one you rode in on today, they came up to thank you because the Stewart tanks had been ordered to go take on that Panther. And it would have been suicide for them. The Panther tank was known to be impervious from the front. And those men wanted to thank you for saving their lives. And one of them was a man named Phil Dest, a crewman on a Stewart tank. Tell us what he said and what your response was.
Philip said to me, "You saved my butt in Cologne there." I said,
Closer.
I said, "No, I did not save your butt. I saved my butt, and you came along for the ride."
Station, just a second. And then we want to invite you to come inside. We're going to do a book signing for this book, Spearhead, that we had worked on for 6 years. 6 years I had to deal with this guy. It was difficult. I'm kidding. And what we're going to really do is a magic show inside. We're going to take a book, and when I sign it, it's going to lose a few dollars in value. And when he signs it, it's going to become priceless, an heirloom, something you'll want to pass down to your kids. And when I go home to Broomfield, when this guy goes home to Allentown, that story is going to live on through the book.
This is my buddy, and he's the greatest author in the world.
And we're about to present the painting, and once again, thank you so much. 3% of our World War II veterans are still living.
Wow.
That means 97% of them are gone. And it's a cold day, but it's a good day to be here. Because you're here, because these vehicles are here, because Union Station is here, and because we have one of our best veterans right standing in front of us. Thank you again, Clarence.
Word on General Rose.
The greatest general that ever served, I think. He led from the front and not from the rear. He always used to say, "We're going to be up at the front with the soldiers, not at the end up with the cooks and the supply people." So sorry, but he should have been back a little further. He's lost his life. I was very sorry. Everybody loved him. Everybody loved General Rose. He was the greatest.
In the future, will know the name Rose, will know the name Smoyer, will know the name the Spearhead Division. And people like this, right here, the future generations, will come to understand the sacrifices that these men had made.
Denver and all the proud Coloradans were honored to accept this, and will display it proudly. Colonel, thank you for your generous gift.